Two widows knocked on a hermit's door during a blizzard. He had not spoken to anyone in 8 months. They survived winter together. When spring came, both had fallen in love with him. They said, "Choose one of us." His answer shocked them both. This is their story. Welcome to Shadow of the West. Subscribe and ring the bell for more legendary tales of love, courage, and the untamed frontier. The year was 1868, and the Colorado High Country was a land that God had made beautiful and then abandoned to the elements. The peaks rose like jagged teeth against a sky so blue it hurt to look at. Snow fell 8 months of the year. The summers were brief and violent, with storms that could kill a man between one breath and the next. This was not a place for the weak or the hopeful. This was a place where survival was a daily negotiation with death. In a valley so remote that maps did not bother to name it, there lived a man called Jeremiah Cole. He was 47 years old, though he looked 60 and felt older still. His beard was gray and wild. His hands were scarred from decades of trapping and building and fighting the wilderness for every scrap of existence. His eyes were the color of the sky before a storm, blue-gray and distant. They were the eyes of a man who had stopped looking for anything beyond the next season. Jeremiah had come to the mountains in 1845 when he was 24 years old, young enough to believe he was running towards something rather than away. He had been a farmer's son in Ohio. He had been engaged to a girl named Clara, who smiled like springtime. He had been full of dreams and plans, and the certainty that life would cooperate with his wishes. Then Clara had chosen his brother instead. She had married Thomas Cole 2 weeks before the wedding she had planned with Jeremiah. She had not even told him to his face. He had learned from a letter delivered by a neighbor boy who could not meet his eyes. Jeremiah had packed a bag that night. He had walked away from the farm and the family and the future he had imagined. He had kept walking until the land rose beneath his feet, and the trees grew thick, and the silence became so complete that he could finally stop hearing Clara's voice in his memory. 23 years he had lived alone in these mountains. 23 years of building his cabin stone by stone. 23 years of trapping beaver and fox and trading pelts for the few supplies he could not make himself. 23 years of talking to no one but the wind and the wolves, and occasionally his own reflection in the still water of the creek. He had never married. He had never wanted to. The wound Clara left had healed into a scar so thick that nothing could penetrate it. Women were a memory of pain. Love was a word that belonged to a language he had forgotten how to speak. This was his life. This was his peace. This was everything he needed. Then they arrived. It was late October when Jeremiah found them. The first snow had already fallen and the second was coming. The sky had that iron look that promised a storm within hours. He was checking his trap line 3 miles from the cabin when he saw movement on the slope below. At first he thought it was elk. Then he saw the colors, blue and brown, and the pale flash of faces turned upward toward where he stood. People. 2 of them, moving slowly, too slowly, climbing toward his valley like they were using their last strength to do it. Jeremiah watched for a long moment. Every instinct told him to turn away. People meant trouble. People meant questions and complications, and the end of the silence he had built so carefully. He had not spoken to another human being in 8 months. He had not wanted to, but the storm was coming, and even from this distance he could see that the figures below were struggling, stumbling. One of them fell and the other bent to help her rise. They were women. Both of them. Jeremiah cursed under his breath. He checked his rifle. Then he began walking down the slope to meet them. Their names were Mary and Ruth. They were sisters, though they looked nothing alike. Mary was the elder at 34. She was tall, with dark hair streaked gray before its time, and eyes that held the flat emptiness of someone who had seen too much. Ruth was 29, smaller, fairer. Her eyes still held light, but it was the desperate light of hope that knows it is fading. They were both widows. Mary's husband had died in a mining accident in Central City 6 months before. Ruth's husband had died of fever 3 months after that. They had been left with nothing, no money, no family, no prospects in a territory that had little use for women without men to support them. They had tried to survive in town. They had taken in washing and mending. They had endured the comments and the propositions and the slow starvation that came from work that paid almost nothing. Then winter had approached and their landlord had demanded payment they could not provide. He had suggested an alternative. They had refused. He had thrown them out. They had heard rumors of a hermit who lived in the high country, a man who kept to himself but was said to be decent. They had decided to find him and beg for shelter until spring. It was that or freeze in the streets of a town that did not want them. They had been walking for 4 days. They had run out of food 2 days ago. They had nearly died 3 times on the mountain passes, and now here they were, standing before a man with wild gray beard and storm-colored eyes who looked at them like they were ghosts he had not asked to see. Jeremiah listened to their story without speaking. When they finished, he was quiet for a long time. Then he said the words that would echo through the years. He said he had never had a wife. He said he did not know how to live with people anymore. He said his cabin was small and his supplies were limited and winter was long and hard in these mountains. But he said the storm was coming. He said he was not the kind of man who let people freeze. He said they could stay until the passes cleared in spring. He said they should not expect anything more than survival. The winter that followed was the strangest of Jeremiah's life. His cabin that had known only his footsteps now held 3 sets of boots by the door. His table that had seated 1 now crowded 3. His silence that had been complete was now filled with voices he was still learning to tolerate. Mary took over the cooking without asking permission. She transformed his bachelor meals of jerky and beans into something that almost resembled real food. She organized his supplies with an efficiency that bordered on military. She cleaned corners of the cabin that had not seen attention in decades. Ruth was different. She was gentler, quieter. She spent hours reading the handful of books Jeremiah had collected over the years. She asked him questions about the mountains, about the animals, about the way the light changed on the peaks at different times of day. She listened when he answered as if his words were precious. Jeremiah found himself talking more than he had in 23 years. At first just grunts and short answers, then sentences, then stories he had not told anyone. The mountains, the seasons, the wolf pack he had watched grow over 15 years. The eagle that nested on the cliff above his cabin every spring. He did not speak of Ohio. He did not speak of Clara. Some doors stayed closed. The weeks became months. December gave way to January. January surrendered to February. The snow piled higher than the windows. The world became a white silence broken only by wind and the crack of frozen trees. And somewhere in that silence, something began to change. Jeremiah noticed Mary watching him when she thought he was not looking. He noticed the way she made sure his coffee was ready before he woke. He noticed the way she asked about his day with an interest that seemed too genuine to be politeness. He noticed Ruth, too. The way she smiled when he entered the room. The way she saved passages from books to read aloud to him in the evenings. The way her hand sometimes brushed his when she passed him at the table. They were both looking at him with something in their eyes he had not seen directed at himself in more than 2 decades. Hope, interest, something that might become more if he allowed it. Jeremiah did not know what to do. He had built his life around solitude. He had convinced himself that love was a closed chapter. Now 2 women were opening it again, and he could not read the language written there. The confrontation came in March, when the first hints of spring were beginning to show at the lower elevations. Mary and Ruth had been whispering together for days, private conversations that stopped when Jeremiah entered the room. Glances exchanged that held meaning he could not interpret, a tension building that even he could feel. One evening after dinner, Mary stood and faced him directly. Ruth rose to stand beside her sister. They had clearly planned this moment. They had clearly been gathering courage for days. Mary spoke first. She said they needed to talk about what would happen when the passes cleared. She said they could not return to Central City. They had nothing there. No future, no safety. She said they had found something in this cabin they had not expected to find. Peace, purpose. Something that felt like it might become home if they were allowed to stay. Ruth spoke next. She said she knew Jeremiah valued his solitude. She said she knew he had lived alone for more than 2 decades. She said she understood if he wanted them to leave when spring came, but she said she hoped he would ask them to stay. Then Mary said the words that hung in the cold cabin air like smoke. She said they were not fools. She said they had both grown to care for him. She said they knew that was complicated. She said they knew the world would not understand. She said if he wanted either of them as a wife, they would accept. She said they had discussed it between themselves. She said he could choose one of us. The silence that followed was deeper than any Jeremiah had known in his years of solitude. He looked at these 2 women who had stumbled into his Ife, half dead and desperate. He looked at the hope in their eyes, the fear, the vulnerability of people offering something precious and waiting to see if it would be accepted or crushed. He thought of Clara, the choice that had been made without him, the pain that had shaped his entire adult life, the walls he had built so high that no one could climb them. He thought of the past months, Mary's steady competence, Ruth's gentle warmth, the way the cabin felt different with them in it, fuller, warmer, more like a home than the shelter it had been for 23 years. He thought of what they were asking, to choose one, to reject the other, to create a winner and a loser in a contest neither woman deserved to lose. And then he gave his answer. He said he would not choose. He said he was not going to pick one sister over another. He said he was not going to create that wound between them. He said he had seen what rejection did to people. He had lived it for more than half his life. He said he wanted them both to stay, not as competition, not as rivals, not as options to be selected, as family. He said he did not know how to be a husband. He said he had been alone too long to pretend he could give either of them what they deserved in that way. But he said he could give them a home, safety, a life in the mountains away from the cruelty of the world below. He said they could build something together, something that did not have a name because the world had not imagined it yet. A household of 3 broken people who had found each other against all odds. He said the choice was not his to make alone. It was theirs too. He asked if that was enough. Mary and Ruth Lou ked at each other. Something passed between them. Years of sisterhood, months of shared survival. The unspoken communication of people who had been through fire together. Then they both turned to Jeremiah and said yes. The years that followed rewrote everything Jeremiah thought he knew about his life. The cabin expanded. He built a larger kitchen for Mary. He built a reading nook with a window for Ruth. He built a front porch where all 3 of them could sit on summer evenings and watch the sun set behind the peaks. They developed rhythms. Mary managed the household with her fierce efficiency. Ruth brought beauty into every corner, with small touches of color and art. Jeremiah continued his trapping, but now he had reasons to come home beyond mere habit. They were not husband and wives in the traditional sense. The world below would never have understood their arrangement, but they were something else, something deeper in some ways. Partners, companions. A family forged from loneliness and necessity and the slow growth of genuine love. Because love did grow. Not romantic love with its jealousies and demands, but something quieter, something that asked for nothing but presence, something that gave without keeping score. Mary stopped looking at him like a potential husband and started looking at him like a beloved friend. Ruth stopped hoping for romance and started appreciating the reality of what they had built. Jeremiah stopped fearing vulnerability and started accepting that he was no longer alone. They never married, any of them. Marriage would have required choosing, and choosing was what they had refused to do. But they lived as a family for 31 years. They raised chickens and goats, and a small herd of cattle that somehow survived the mountain winters. They built a garden that produced vegetables no one in the high country thought possible. They created a home that travelers would occasionally stumble upon and leave shaking their heads at the strange contentment they found there. Ruth died first, in the winter of 1896, a fever that came quickly and left just as quickly, taking her with it. She was 57 years old. Her last words were, "Thank you for the books and the conversations and the life she had never expected to find." Mary followed 3 years later. Her heart simply stopped one morning while she was making breakfast. She was 65. She died doing what she loved, taking care of people. Jeremiah buried them both on the hill behind the cabin. He carved their headstones himself. Ruth's read she found light in the mountains. Mary's read she made a home where none had been. He lived for another 4 years after Mary passed, alone again as he had been in the beginning, but different now. The silence no longer felt like peace. It felt like absence. The cabin no longer felt like shelter. It felt like a monument to people who were gone. He died in the spring of 1903 at the age of 82. They found him in his chair on the porch, looking out at the mountains he had loved for nearly 60 years. He was smiling, the first smile anyone could remember seeing on his weathered face. The people who buried him found a letter in his pocket. It was addressed to no one in particular, perhaps to anyone who might someday read it. It said they asked him to choose and he could not. It said choosing would have meant losi, inch. It said the only answer that made sense was the one the world would never understand. It said he never regretted it, not for a single day. It said love was not a number, not 1 or 2 or any count at all. It said love was whatever shape it needed to be to hold the people who mattered. It said Mary and Ruth had saved him from dying alone in the mountains. It said he hoped wherever they were, they knew he was grateful. It said he was finally coming to join them. It said at last the family would be complete again. They buried him between the 2 women on the hill overlooking the valley. The 3 headstones stand together still. Visitors to that remote place sometimes find them and wonder at the story behind them. The locals still tell it. The mountain man who never married, the 2 widows who arrived half dead in a snowstorm, the choice he refused to make, the family they became instead. They say it was strange. They say it was unconventional. They say the world had no words for what those 3 people built together, but they also say it was love. And like all legends of the Old West, it asks a question that has no easy answer. What would you choose if choosing meant losing someone you could not bear to lose? And what might you build if you refused to choose at all?